And I think all my colleagues agree with that. The reality is that we've got to ensure that each of our businesses do that, and businesses in the countries that we operate do that.
Right. I'd like to ask Mr. Albanian, where do you see the B20 being in 5 to 10 years? And do you think there needs to be more focus on issues of the environment and social inclusion?
Again, I think the questions in terms of where we see the B20 10 years from today, I think I would like to start with the fact that prior the COVID-19, we start seeing a trend of protectionism and populism within the globe. And unfortunately, even when the pandemic erupted early January and February, we have seen some governments have taken certain measures in order for them to lock down their neighbors and borders, and at the same time come up with really a local policy that served and protect their people. But 6 weeks later, they have realized the only way for them to overcome the pandemic challenges, they need to work on collaborative approach with the globe, because this has to be a global solutions. And I'm positive around the fact that this is a quick lesson learned for the entire globe, that the only way for us to manage this globally, we need to come up with really a global platform to create a collaborative and also inclusive growth, as we see here in B20 Saudi Arabia. Not only this, in the same times also the business community have demonstrated a responsibility towards the entire globe. When the crisis erupted, people are not looking at it from a business community only as really serving their shareholders. They are looking at it from a stakeholder's perspective. They have included all stakeholders into their minds and hearts in order for them to come up with really solutions to overcome the implications and impact of COVID-19. So I think the business community have shown that responsibility. Not only this, also we have seen industry are changing their production line. If you look at automotive, they have moved from producing cars to ventilators. If you look at hotels, they move their hotels into hospitals. Certain manufacturing, they move into personal protective equipments and so on. And I think this is a demonstration that business community has a crucial role to play into the entire global society. This will enhance the position of the role of the B20, and I'm confident the B20 after this sessions, especially what KSA has been able to do with the current environment that we have really been able to deal with, the global business community have really come together and work within the B20 Saudi Arabias in order for us to provide solutions. And I think we have been successfully showcase the business global community, and this will bring a long-lasting sustainability of the role of the B20.
Right, thank you. Mr. Funes de Rioja, I'm curious, you have had this leading role as in the Employers Association in Latin America, Argentina. I'm curious, how do you see the stakeholder debate developing in terms of employers and employees, and where do you see the B20 in 5-10 years' time?
Well, let me tell you that during our term in 2019, we not only we had the honor to be host, and our B20 had a very active participation of the business community, not only at local but also international level. But at that time, we consolidated the Global Business Coalition, that was an alliance of business organizations, in order to have a clear role as an international community. The second thing that I want to recall the attention is what we reinforce the idea of the Troika. That's the reason Alexander Shockley mentioned that. But which we work with our predecessors, China and Germany, and later on with Japan and Saudi Arabia, in order to consolidate this agenda. Regarding the question of the relationship with stakeholders, first, what our first concern was to be sure that all the levels of the business community were committed. Not only the large company, but also the small and middle company were involved. And all the regions of my country, that is a large country, and with different conditions. And the second one was to have a relationship with workers through in between the B20 and L20. And I want to say that we signed up a common understanding in order to discuss the question of education and employment. I think it was very important at that time. And we follow the patterns of the German model, linking education with employment. And the union's leader accepted that. And we work together, looking at the future and the impact of Industry 4.0 and digitalization and so on. The second question that we took into account is the need to be sure that we had a document for advocacy. And we created a high-level caucus, following an example created by the Americans at the time that they had the G20 process, and our colleagues, the B20. And to be sure that each one of the members could transfer to their governments to lobby the responsibles of the G20 in order to try to have impact of the B20 recommendations on the G20 final document. I want to tell you finally that the other question that we need to take care is about the follow-up. What happened next? Then, okay, is the declaration, the last participation, and after that, you need to continue dealing with the question of follow-up of what happened with the previous declaration, and looking at the future. Because what we see in general terms is that the multilateral system normally make a lot of declarations, but without concrete outcomes and results or impact. And as business community, we are convinced that we need impact. And let me tell you that in our case, we could involve more than 1,700 business leaders, 34% of small companies, 27% of women at that time, and more than 1,000 CEOs and CFOs, 60 or 70%, between 60 to 70% international ones, and the other local ones. And that was a great impact. You need to remember that only 3 countries at the region have G20s. It's Mexico, Brazil, and Argentina. Till now, it's Mexico and Argentina that could do it. Then what we try to do is to show up first that Latin America is well prepared in order to deal with this question and to discuss internationally. Second, to give continuity to the present and looking at the future. And that's the reason by which continue working with all of our colleagues at the B20 level. And we are committed with the values, transparency, multilateralism, fair trade and globalization and so on, and with the commitments regarding what we can define as a growth inclusive policy.
Right. Well, that leads very nicely into a question I'd like to put to Dr. Shurkin from the audience, which is, what do you think about the furthered and continued development of B20 cooperation? How do you get the 47% of your points and requests to be on the agenda next time?
First of all, I would like to say that for Russian business community, social inclusion and climate change is they are the real challenges for Russian business. And we would like to use Japanese experience during the Japanese presidency, the special book of the best corporate practices of the sustainable development on corporate level in different countries, not only within G20, but also in the developing world, in Africa, for example. This book was very, not only interesting, but important to, to use this experience by other companies, corporates, etc. It seems to me it would be good to use this approach during next presidencies. And second, I'd like to say that climate change for us now it's very important challenge, and because new Green Deal, European Green Deal, might lead to the unfair competition between exporters to European Union and European companies, original European companies. That's why we would like to use, fair approach to coincide and combine WTO standards and international legislation with new Green Deal. But at the same time, we would like to go very rapidly to minimize carbon emission. Russia is one of the leaders in this field. But at the same time, we have to have not only macro-regional rules like European Green Deal, but international rules in this field. Speaking about the role of B20 in forthcoming 5-10 years, it seems to me that G20 mechanism is the most efficient mechanism in comparison with WTO, even with United Nations institutions. And B20 as a key outreach group, it seems to me have good chances not only to survive, but to influence to the decision-making process, agenda process, and fulfillment of the obligations of the G20. To do this, it seems to me that B20 needs to improve self-organization using the best national practices. And also, it would be necessary to organize more efficient mechanism of cooperation between B20 and G20. For example, it would be good to have joint meetings of B20 task forces and G20 working groups. Perhaps it would be good to organize joint working groups. Also, it seems to me that it's necessary to invite business community united in B20 to solve emergency issues like COVID pandemic situation, because one of the real problem for many industries, companies, etc., the lockdowns. Just a few days ago, we met Mr. Putin, Russian president, and we agreed that no new lockdowns will be introduced. But at the same time, the companies, the business community has to follow all strong recommendations of the healthcare institutions, and we have to work here together, minimize economic consequences of pandemic, but at the same time to improve the situation with our labor force, with families of our employees, etc. And finally, I want to say that we have more close cooperate with other outreach groups. Labor 20, Women 20, Civil 20, Think 20, Youth 20, and of course, in all this direction of cooperation, B20 has to be as a key element, because G20 is economic institution, and B20 has to be in the center of this outreach family.
Right. Well, thank you very much indeed, Dr. Shurkin. We don't have a lot more time left, but I'm very keen to bring in Marcus Wallenberg to get your reactions and thoughts on this. When you look ahead 5-10 years, what do you expect to see? What do you want to see? And to what degree do you think innovation can be supported right now in these current pandemic troubled times?
Well, Gillian, I think two points here. First, I do believe that business is well aware of that protectionism and isolationism does not really work and doesn't really lead in a historical perspective into something good. I do believe that all of us dealing with international trade and investments know that this is a win-win proposition, not a zero-sum game. And I think this is worthwhile to point out to politicians. year and year again, and therefore I think the B20 has a very important role to fill also going forward. If we're going to be able, secondly, if we're going to be able to deal with some of the biggest challenges facing us all, we need innovation. I come from a country which we call the triple helix. We work together, academia, business and government together. I think this is an important concept to think about, that we're all in on this together. If we're going to deal with sustainability, for example, and climate, which is a global problem. It's not for a single nation, it's a global problem. We need innovation. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed. It's been a fascinating discussion. A number of key themes have been touched on. I guess I would take away 3 or 4 key points. Firstly, at a time of rising protectionism, there is a strong desire to push for global cooperation. Secondly, people recognize that they need to get the business voice out and may need some institutional changes or process changes to ensure that happens alongside the governmental voice, as Dr. Shorkin says. Perhaps having more regular liaisons and dialogue between the G20 and B20 is important. Thirdly, another key point is that inclusive growth, inclusion, is absolutely center stage right now as people look to the pandemic and its terrible impacts. And fourthly, there is a strong desire to make sure that the concept of market forces, businesses, commerce remains very much on the agenda. So it just relies for me to say a big thank you to all of you for sharing your thoughts. Very best of luck in pushing forward these goals. And we're now going to turn to the next panelist, who's going to give us a very different perspective in terms of what is needed now to push forward the B20 agenda. So thank you.
Thank you.
Now, we're going to be talking next. Well, thank you to everyone once again for that very interesting panel discussion to frame the debate. And as I said earlier, some of the key themes that have emerged is a growing focus on inclusion, inclusive growth, and looking both at the social aspects of inclusive growth and the environmental and sustainability aspects of that. Another key focus was the need for business to work with government and multilateral institutions and wider society. And a third crucial theme was the need to fight protectionism and to work within a global context. And we're now going to be hearing from Werner Hoyer, Dr. Werner Hoyer, who runs the European Investment Bank, which has a particularly interesting role to play right now in all of those 3 aspects. The EIB is obviously a major pillar of the European Union's attempt to push forward growth in a socially inclusive way, and also to champion cooperation between the government, non-governmental and business world. As part of the European Union, it's been seeking to try and take a more global international approach. And although it's obviously European, as its name suggests, it is trying to work outside the European Union as well, and essentially promote an idea of development and growth, which can help build more global cooperation. But perhaps the most interesting aspect of what the EIB has been doing, and something that Dr. Hoyer is going to be talking about in particular, is a question of environmental sustainability and climate change. Early this year, the EIB came out with a series of announcements about how it was changing its rules in relation to financing fossil fuels, which are not just significant in terms of what the EIB itself has been doing, but have a wider significance for the private sector more broadly. Because as the EIB lays out its strategy, it's also creating a sense for what the private sector can or cannot do, and where financial support for fossil fuels and environmental change is heading more broadly. And of course, that plays into the wider international debate about where the efforts to promote a more inclusive framework are going in the future. So there are many reasons why the role of the EIB is interesting, not just from the perspective of Europe, not just from the perspective of a quasi-governmental financing body, but also in terms of being a bellwether, or if you like, a litmus test for the broader
human inheritance, then darkness and entropy, failure and free fall, something you have to choose. A fight that never ends, a hope that always burns, a belief that our inheritance can be greater than the sum of its parts. Maybe we have been choosing this.